You're listening to Sox in the Basement, a production of the Broadcast Basement Limited, where every show is 30 minutes of good and comes from a basement bar on the south side of Chicago. Pull up a stool, pour a cold one, and join us right now for Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found, and always at soxinthebasement.com. There's a multi-billionaire down in Springfield who has two different sports teams in the city of Chicago asking for a $1 billion handout so he can build his second baseball stadium in his tenure as owner. Remember, the stadium before that, 80 years for the baseball palace of the world.
Right, 80 years. It saw multiple leagues. It saw all-star games being invented. It saw all-star games being played.
Two world wars.
I mean,
saw a lot. Saw a lot. This one here, if everything goes to plan, will do about half of that lifespan. But he needs $1 billion. I'm going to tell you, look, it is my money because I'm a taxpayer, right? So if I'm asked about it, or if it becomes a thing where I run into one of my representatives here, I'm going to tell him I think it's ridiculous that you're going to give this guy $1 billion. So I'm completely against it. But in the end, do I really believe that this little man here sitting at his 9-foot homemade oak bar, or you over there, has any influence over whether or not a billionaire gets a $1 billion handout? No. So whatever happens. I'm not gonna stress about it. I'm not gonna yell about it on this show. I just find it to be absurd. Like, so many things in this world are absurd. Like, we have the two oldest presidential candidates ever likely facing each other for the next election. Like, I find that to be absurd. Like, I everything about life can be just absurd if you look at the people that have all the money and all the power. It's crazy. And that's kind of how I look at the whole thing with the stadium deal. If he gets $1 billion, I'm going to shrug and say, well, another thing in a long list of absurdities that I've seen in my life.
I hate to sound ageist here, but you're talking about old people doing things how they've always done it, right? This is Jerry being an old rich man who knows that you don't get to be an old rich man without bilking the public a little bit here and there, right? You get wealthy on the backs of other people. I'm sorry to say that, and it sounds awfully political and stuff, but yeah, we've got old people trying to control the money, old people trying to hold on here, and Jerry is that, okay? He is trying to hold on to relevance. The whole idea of building a new stadium is really so that there is a Jerry Reinsdorf goodwill feeling, something that he's left behind that he could be really proud of, because we have spent the past 30 years kind of trashing the current stadium in various ways.
I'm still going to trash him if he gets a brand new stadium. I also think that this billionaire is in open collusion with the other billionaires in the American League Central. I looked it up on Spot Track. It's staggering. The first 14 teams in Major League Baseball are above the league average, which includes the Colorado Rockies, folks. They're above the league average in payroll. Meanwhile, the bottom half of baseball includes every American League Central team. The White Sox, coming in at 15th highest payroll, are below league average. The Twins are at 16th. The Tigers are at 20th. The Royals are at 24th. And the Guardians are at 26th right now. Now, if that is an open collusion of a group of owners sitting around saying, well, I'm not going to spend money. Are you going to spend money? Let's not spend money. I mean, why aren't the Twins spending money right now? It's crazy to me that they're not putting a few more dollars in and trying to win a division and then make a run in the postseason. They're like primed for it. Like, don't even talk about the White Sox. Why aren't they interested, right? Like, look what the Royals did. They have a new stadium coming, so they gave a ton of money to Bobby Witt Jr., but they're ranked 24th highest and they're below $100 million in payroll this year. Like to me, that's the thing that really bothers me this week, is looking at the idea that you have an entire division in Major League Baseball that is not spending above the league average collectively. Nobody even bats an eye at it. It's terrible for all these fan bases that all of them are treated the way that they're treated. And you can't tell me, looking at the history of how this division is run and how easy it is every year for teams to go out and play in it, because nobody steps up and says, I'm taking this division. You can't tell me. I mean, I have no proof. I understand, right? I understand the legality of saying this is just my opinion, but give me a break. I honestly, in my soul, believe these guys all get on a phone call with each other or go through intermediaries and talk about, we're not going to go over this level, because it's ridiculous to look at the fact you have an entire division in Major League Baseball below league average in payroll here as spring training begins.
Well, and you can sit there and say, like, this was a terrible year for free agents, and there really isn't any money that you wanted, that the teams really wanted to spend. I mean, you hear horror stories coming out of the Scott Boras camp that you can't call about Jordan Montgomery right now because he makes you talk about Blake Snell first, because he's got to get him signed before he'll even deal with his other client. And you hear things about how these ridiculous demands for the top end free agents, 4 of which are still under Boras control, not signed. You've watched guys, viable guys like Hyun-Jin Ryu just went back to Korea. Okay, he came back from injury last year. He looked okay. It wasn't, his underlying numbers weren't great or whatever, but there's a reasonably priced starting pitcher, like a guy that has a track record of success in the majors, would have liked to have been on a team, and he's going to go back to Korea now because nobody really wanted to give him anything.
But do you believe that any of those 5 teams are ready to go out and get any of those players? Because it doesn't seem like they are.
That's where I'm going with this, is that it doesn't make sense, though, that these teams, I mean, I understand, like, the Guardians are a young team. They're all cheap. Most of their core players are cheap, but they have the opportunity to go out and then make a splash, right? There should be room for them to do that, to put them over the top, to go back and win this division, because they have some good pitching, in their rotation, some good young pitching. But having another established guy, because Shane Bieber's a little shaky, having another established guy would have made a lot of sense, right? And throwing some money, or going after and getting somebody in a trade, like going after Corbin Burns, even though he's an expensive guy, he would have made sense for the Guardians. And there, you can sit there and say, we have a young team, we have a cheap payroll because of that, but why aren't you trying to put yourself over the top? And you're right. You're absolutely right. The Twins are not that. The Twins should be spending money. The Twins should be adding to their payroll. They let guys walk this year that they didn't want to pay. So there's a lot of question marks around that. And I think some of it too, one, it could be collusion, like you said, but two, the other thing is that if I'm these teams in the AL Central and I'm looking at what should be the dominating team, I am going to bring this back to the White Sox. I'm looking at the one major market team that's in my division that should be destroying us every year, that should be in the top, at least the top half of payroll, if not the top 10 in payroll every year, and should be ruining their chances for the rest of the AL Central every single year unless they catch lightning in a bottle and have a whole bunch of prospects hit at once.
Oh, the Sox should be perennially the favorite every single year because of the fact they're in the Chicago market. And don't cry poor about what's going on the South Side, or Jerry needs a new stadium to do it. He's been the owner for 4 decades. He may be good at real estate, but he's really bad at realizing that if he were to put together a competitive team, he would make more money. He's really bad at the business of baseball.
And he has been. And so I don't, if I'm Detroit, if I'm their ownership, I don't know if first of all, how much Little Caesars can you sell? But if I'm the ownership there, I'm sitting there going, I don't know if I really want to break my bank because I can compete in this division without doing it. And if you're the Royals are another team I don't understand. You're right. They're willing to give Bobby Witt Jr. all that money, but they're signing bargain basement free agents, and they're going to try and compete with lesser guys. But the problem is that with all of that, it's the Jerry Reinsdorf, and here's where I don't know if it's active collusion or if it's just, Jerry spreading a cancer throughout this division of the idea that you can compete in the division every year and keep for the 162 game season. You can keep everybody in the fan base interested, all right? But you don't necessarily have to go out and buy a World Series because you think you're not going to compete with the Dodgers, who just went out and just went superstar hunting this offseason.
Right, it's okay as long as you're competing and you come in second place and you can save a little bit of money. I mean, it's not like we don't have a former GM and president in baseball operations in David Sampson who hasn't said it over and over again, including on this show, that was Jerry Reinsdorf's philosophy and that he's told him that directly. So I mean, it's not like that hasn't been uttered. Whether or not it's true or not, it has been uttered by somebody who you would actually put some stock into what he said.
Doesn't the AL Central look like a collection of teams that all want to finish second place to each other?
Yes, it's exactly what it looks like. And this episode of Sox in the Basement and every episode of this podcast for fans by fans brought to you by the place for White Sox pregame, postgame, and in-game viewing parties, Cork and Kerry at the Park. Get over there right now and register for free. You could be heading to Hawaii. The drawing is on March the 15th. You can actually register at 33rd and Princeton at Cork and Kerry at the Park, or at the original location at 106th and Western. That place is going to be live on Parade Day, March 17th, for the Southside Irish Parade. I'm trying to get Ed to come out there this year. I'm out there every year. I want him to join me. But the trip to Hawaii brought to you by Kona Brewing and Cork and Carry. $5 Konas on draft right now at both locations. See more at corkandcarry.com. You hear Chris Getz, and I don't blame Getz for this at all. I go back to the idea that we have a guy who has to deal with whatever his owner gives him. And Chris Getz had to go on the corporate podcast, which of course is owned by a media company that is majority owned by Jerry Reinsdorf. And Chuck asked him about the payroll, and he gave the best answer you could probably give. In fact, I kind of liked the answer. It was very inventive. It was different from lawyer speak that we used to get with Rick Hahn, which is, well, why spend money until we know exactly what we have? We have all these prospects. We have all these guys that it's their last chance really out of the group that was the core. Let's just see what we got. And then, of course, once we know what we've got, we know what we need to spend on. Why spend on something that if we actually have it already on this team? And the follow-up question was essentially, well, does that mean you're spending next year? And it was basically possibly. And I would have liked it to have been, of course, right? I just don't know if he could say that. But of course. I think everything coming out of camp tells me that this is a quick turnaround. You're hearing Barfield say it. You're hearing all these guys that he brought in. Right? Bannister saying it. This is essentially we're gonna flip this. Right? We're gonna get the right guys in here, get things going in the right direction. This is not gonna be a 3-4 year long thing. Look at all these veterans we have in camp that are probably taking jobs. So I believe that it means, of course, but he probably thinks that he's not sure, right? How can he be sure with Jerry Reinsdorf as his owner?
Yeah, one, you don't know what Jerry's going to give you budget wise next year because he could suppress the payroll. Just by being a cheapskate and just doing what we've been accusing Jerry of for 40 years. The other part of it too is realistically, and I'll play a little devil's advocate and back up Getz here for a second, even though I actually agree that I think that's just him trying to come up with an inventive answer, and it's not really indicative of where you want to hear your GM. But to kind of go back and advocate for Getz a little bit. As a GM, there are really two reasons why you spend money. One is because there is a player in free agency or available via trade that you're taking on payroll that fits a need that your team has. Okay, so it's something lacking on your roster that you can do, or it represents an improvement over something where you find it to be a weakness, where you have a guy that's there that you're okay with, but you could do better, right? Or it's a player that you would intend to build around. Okay, so if they were to go out, for example, and say, we are going to invest in Cody Bellinger, and I don't know that you want to, and I don't want to get into... I
don't think I want to.
Well, hold on, but I don't want to get into to whether or not you'd want to do that. But let's just say, you know what, let's forget Bellinger and take it out of the present because there's really no guy like this. But let's say it was Bryce Harper, okay? If they had offered Bryce Harper a contract and committed the dollars that Bryce Harper wants. He wants to be a lifelong Philly now, so you're not going to get a chance with him. But if they had done with him what the Phillies did, it's because you want to build around him, okay? Because he's that kind of a talent where you sit there and go, okay, this is a guy that it doesn't matter if we've got a good right fielder or left fielder or center fielder. This is a guy that we want on this team somewhere, okay? That guy, we're not going to be able to beat that guy, so we're going to invest a ton of money. So the question becomes, what's going to be out there that the White Sox are either going to want to build around, which I haven't seen this offseason, and I don't know that there's anything next offseason that you're going to look at and sit there and go salivating like, oh, they got to have that guy. Or what's an improvement? Now, to Getz's point, how do you know what's an improvement until you know what you have? If you can sign and extend Mike Soroka next year because he's gone back to what he was with the Braves pre-injury, then that is essentially a free agent signing for the White Sox, okay? If you end up extending Eric Fetty because the changes that he's made to his mechanics and the changes that he's made to his pitch selection are such that he becomes the ace-level guy that he showed in Korea, and you want to spend money on him, that is still spending the money, okay? It's just you're doing it in-house. We don't see the White Sox extend guys, ever, really. We see them sign contracts to avoid arbitration, but we don't see them extending pitchers. We don't see them re-signing their own free agents. That was a Hahn thing too, right? That's why Dylan Cease has to, quote unquote, has to be traded, okay? Because there's no way we're ever going to extend that guy. I understand it's a Boris thing too, but that's just the idea. So when the money is going to be spent, it could be spent in free agency, but it could also be sitting here saying like, no, you know what? We're going to make sure that we found this guy. We're going to make sure that we stick with him. Okay. We found this guy. We're going to make sure that he's with this team going forward. And from a pitching standpoint, sometimes it is extending the guys that are in-house that have proven it to you. And sometimes it's sitting there going, okay, there's a Jordan Montgomery sitting out there right now that I would love to have as my number 2 or 3 starter, and I'm going to invest dollars in him.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, that's the only thing that he could go out and do right now is sign a pitcher to a 3-year deal or 4-year deal.
Right.
That would make sense right now. Next year, there's a big crop of pitchers. There's a lot of starting pitchers next year, and if and when Yoan Moncada doesn't have a 5-WAR season to justify the $24.8 million he's getting paid this year, I mean, you could make a run with all this payroll room at Alex Bregman, but right now, saying it out loud, I feel like there's something wrong with me mentally, because that would mean that the White Sox would actually have to give somebody a contract over $100 million. But I mean, he does have possibilities in the next off season. And if he does have to deal with an owner that like Jerry Reinsdorf, he has to find all the value first. And when we're talking about value, and by the way, that Moncada thing, just a note as I jump into this next portion of the show, the average win above replacement in last season was $5.7 million. Every win above replacement cost an average of $5.7 million.
That's league wide?
League wide. So for hitters, pitchers were different. They cost a little bit more, okay? But for hitters. And Yoan Moncada would have to have just about a 4.4 win above replacement season to justify the $24.8 million. So with all the hype coming out of spring training with him, right? Like Eloy Jimenez is like, even last year, he knew he needed to go out and work really hard this year and be the best he could be. Wouldn't it have been great if he would have felt that way a couple years ago?
Wouldn't it be great if you know, he just did that for his entire career.
But it's contract year Moncada, right? And in 2019, he was over that threshold, so it's not like it's impossible for him to go and do it. And then you'll have the very interesting offseason conversation of, do you want to give him another $25 million? Do you think he'll do it again? So, I mean, he'll be interesting to watch, but my standards for what he needs to do is a lot higher than he hit a couple of home runs in his first batting session in spring training and get ready for contract year Moncada to have a 6-WAR season. I don't buy it, and I'm not buying it until I see the guy go out and play. Like this whole thing, like I'm going to get 150 games in. Prove it, all right? Because every time you get a hangnail, you're done for 2 weeks. There's always like an itch. There's always like a strain, my legs, my back and my legs. I mean, I've gotten tired of it as a fan. I'm sorry if I sound like a jerk picking on a guy. Maybe he's the most wonderful guy in the world, but I don't want to hear about best shape of my life and I'm going to do 150 games and I'm really focused this year as opposed to all the other years. I just don't want to hear it. But when I look at the rest of the players on this roster and I see the quotes coming out early on in camp, I am convinced your bench is going to be a veteran bench of a lot of non-roster invitees. Like that Maldonado and Stassi are definitely your catching battery. And when you look at the other 3 likely bench spots, Kevin Pillar is going to make the team. I think that Mike Moustakas, I heard his quote basically like, I need to make the team. Like he looks super focused. I think that guy's taking Gavin Sheets' job.
He might take a lot from Gavin Sheets. He might be driving Gavin Sheets' car by the end of it. He might just steal his identity in general.
Right. He might take everything from him. And Danny Mendick, I'm sorry, watch out for the dark horse and Danny Mendick making the team and being on the bench. I really do feel like you're going to have a lot of guys on this team and you're going to say, wait a minute, this doesn't look like a rebuild roster. Why aren't we playing the young guys? And I just don't think that's what they're going to end up doing. I think the rotation is so interesting to me because we did a poll on Twitter, Ed, and I want to get your reaction real quick on this. I asked people like, who do you think is going to win out at certain things? You know, just a little one, just a quick straw poll. Wasn't up for very long. Not a ton of votes. But I mean, like, just got like a taste of what Sox fans were thinking. I think the majority of White Sox fans feel like that Mike Moustakas is going to end up on the team. I found that to be very interesting. Most people are kind of agreeing with what I'm saying here, that these are the guys you'll probably see. Dominic Fletcher is probably going to be the starting right fielder. But when I asked the question, assuming Cease, Fede, and Soroka make the starting rotation, pick one of these 4 pitchers you want most in the starting 5. And it was between Kopech, Flexen, Crochet, or the field. And Kopech with 65% of the vote. I think White Sox fans really want a guy who's in his 7th year to finally prove something. And I want it too. But I think that that 4 and that 5 spot are the most intriguing things about camp to me, because you have, again, 14 pitchers, take those 3 off, 11 guys fighting for 3 spots. I think Flexen's more assured of getting in there than Michael Kopech. And he's got to have a really good spring for the White Sox to say, okay, fine, we're not moving you to the bullpen yet, even though that's where I think he ends up.
Well, like you said, prove it over the course of 7 years. Okay. So when we're talking about some of these guys that we have lived and died with their prospect status, the fact that they haven't panned out, I think there's some thought process here amongst White Sox fans. Like, Michael Kopech's still a young guy. He's not. Okay. Dylan Cease isn't really all that young of a guy. I mean, he is, but he's not. And you're kind of talking about Kopech like, well, he's still got all this upside and potential. What has he shown? Really, what has he shown since his prospect status changed when he started pitching in the major leagues that makes you think he is a complete package front of the line starting pitcher? Chris Flexen has had at least one season as a full-time starter where he was not only viable, he was actually competent and really pretty good. He was a pitch to contact guy who needed defense behind him, but guess what the White Sox are set up to be, right? They're set up to be a good defensive team behind a guy that pitches to contact. So when you're talking about Michael Kopech, I mean, as a fan, yeah, I'd love to see the return on investment. I would love to see that the Chris Sale trade actually mattered, because right now it's given you years of disappointment for the two guys you got back that were supposed to be the top of this team. But in reality, if you're Pedro Grifol, you're probably sitting there going, I like the fact that Flexen's actually done it. There's nothing that says that Michael Kopech can pitch 180 innings and, provide league average or above starts in that entire time. Flexen's done it, right? I mean, it's factual that he has actually performed at that level. It's the same thing with Garrett Crochet, except Crochet has never gotten the chance to start and gotten a chance to show that, okay? And the other young guys that are vying for it, there's some guys like Davis Martin, when he's finally healthy, he has shown that he can actually be a pretty good starting pitcher in the league when he's given a chance.
The guy that sticks out to me is Jared Schuster. I think if you take Jared Schuster and what he did in the minors and his short stint with Atlanta last year, I know he's got options and all that other stuff, but Jared Schuster as a left-handed starter who just came over in that deal where you got 5 guys for Aaron Bummer, which I still think was great. But that's a guy that you can compare very easily to Michael Kopech.
Oh, yeah.
And he doesn't have the years of disappointment attached to him. Like, he still actually has more potential than what Kopech has because you've seen so much out of him. There are names on this roster right now that if they beat out Michael Kopech and he ended up in the bullpen, I wouldn't be shocked by it. I know that now, early on, it's the hype train, right? Like, Michael Kopech's 20 pounds lighter, and he's working with Brian Bannister, and he's feeling really positive, and you want to believe it, right? You want to believe that as a fan, just as much as I want to believe that Eloy Jimenez is going to not only be healthy, but he's just going to go out and hit 40 bombs, right? That as he said, he and Luis Robert Jr. are going to be the guys that are going to have to kind of lead this team. Yeah, I want that. I've been waiting for it, right? But I also look at a guy like Kopech and think to myself, okay, well, but you might not be that. You might be what Scott Merkin talked about with the idea of guys can have big springs and then not actually perform during the season. And it'll be something that I'll be watching as a fan. Are you putting the right guys in the right position coming out of spring training to try to win? And if somebody stumbles in the first month or two, are you going to move them? Or you still feel this allegiance? I haven't seen it from Getz that he feels allegiance to anybody, which again makes this so interesting over the next couple of months. Sox in the Basement out there supporting small business. You can do so as well. Go to soxinthebasement.com, look on the menu bar, click on store. You can also look in the show notes for this episode. There are links in there. One of the companies you will see when you click through to the Sox in the Basement store, Split Rock Coffee. Owned by veterans, benefiting veterans, traditional coffees and cold brews. Check it out. Camp Craft Cocktails also makes it very easy for you to be an at-home bartender. And now new to the store, the Nimble XLR Percussion Massage Gun. I think I saw one of those devices on the latest Curb Your Enthusiasm this weekend. See it all at soxinthebasement.com.
You're talking about allegiance to Michael Kopech. Where should the allegiance lie with him? Because it's not like this is a guy that provided you with outstanding starting pitching. This is a guy who was pretty good in the bullpen for Tony La Russa for 1 year and was a pretty useful weapon, but also couldn't stay healthy. He's never been able to stay healthy. He's either had arm problems or he's had leg problems the entire time, okay? And you watch him and you just wonder, can he hold up? He showed up 20 pounds lighter. I don't recall anybody saying that Michael Kopech looked fat last year. All right? Or that was the problem, or that he was carrying too much on his frame. He's a tall, lanky guy, and understand pitching mechanics, okay? And this is something I was thinking about because people were saying, well, why didn't we re-sign Liam Hendriks to let him, rehab, or why wouldn't you sign Brandon Woodruff to let him rehab? Understand what Michael Kopech is. Now, he's had his elbow done, and the elbow that's torque, okay? That's where you get your RPMs, that's where you get your spin. All right. So when you get that stabilized with Tommy John surgery, really what you're coming back to is an elbow that's much, much stronger and more stable because it's got a brand new, it's got brand new parts in it. And so pitchers tend to come back and they tend to have the RPMs and the spin rate, which Kopech does. Control, if you never had it, you're not going to get it after Tommy John because your whole arm would feel different, right? Your forearm and your hand and all that working together off of that ligament, it's going to feel a little bit different. So, like Liam Hendriks, next year is not going to be terribly effective for the Red Sox when he does come back because it's going to take him a while. He hasn't pitched in 2 years. It's going to take him a while to find his control. And we always watch Liam Hendriks lose control anyway, right? And that's been Kopech's deal. He doesn't spot his pitches particularly well and never has. And the power for him comes from his legs and comes from the shoulder. That's any pitcher. Your shoulder and your lower body is what gives you the velocity. So Kopech's got that length and he's got the ability to, get that arm going and get that great velocity and extension. But he keeps blowing out his hammy and he keeps tweaking a knee and he keeps doing that. And again, so he showed up lighter, but are you stronger? Are you more flexible? Are you going to hold up? Okay, that's what the problem is too, is Kopech, if he comes in and has a great spring, but he still just throws fastballs, he still just throws sliders, and he relies on guys to chase because he can't spot them, and he doesn't have a third pitch, he's not a viable starting pitcher, and he never will be at that point until he does something like reinvent himself like Eric Fedde did. So if he's working with Bannister and he comes in and now he's got a changeup, he's got that Logan Webb split change that Fedde's going to feature as well, and he's going to pitch to contact, and he's going to be a ground ball guy who could also rush it up there. That's different. That's a different guy. But you can't do that in spring. And when you hear guys come in with a pitch and come in with a change, it's something that they have done over the offseason. They have developed, I've been reading guys have developed split finger pitches that on the Mariners because they were watching how, their teammates did with it last year, or, Fedde coming in and working with Logan Webb and learning that changeup. I haven't heard anything about that with Kopech. All I've heard is that, he still has electric stuff. And we know he's got velocity. We know he's got the spin rate, but he's never shown control. He's never shown stamina. So tell me what changes. And then if you don't have any allegiance to a guy like that, that's fine because throws hard and has a good slider is a dime a dozen. The Sox just traded a guy who throws hard and has a good slider in Gregory Santos to get back a guy who throws hard, has a decent slider, and an outfielder. I wish
I threw hard and had a decent slider. My life would be very different right now.
I'm left-handed, so you'd think I would be. Good God, I'd be on easy street.
When you hear Pedro talk about his leadoff hitter, and I think it's going to be Andrew Benintendi, because he's there's a bunch of guys, but he mentions Benintendi, and I think Benintendi makes the most amount of sense. And then you see, I think anybody with a brain realizes your best two hitters, theoretically, are going to be Robert Jr. and Jimenez.
With a chance for Andrew Vaughn, I think, still to join that conversation.
Okay, but he doesn't run very well, so I don't want him in the 2 spot.
No.
Okay?
No.
And I look at guys who can run, and if we do have contract year Moncada, or if they do see a spark in him during spring training, do you start the year with him sitting in the 2 spot, or at least whatever combination you're going to use? And honestly, I'm one of those people that, I used to be an old school guy. It's like, your Frank Thomas bats third. That's your best guy is in the 3 spot. Well, over the years now, a lot of people put their best guy 2. I wouldn't care if they had Robert Jr. 2. I wouldn't care if they had him 3. I wouldn't put him 4. If you want to go old school and have a guy that's got some speed that isn't your best hitter in the 2 spot, as long as it gets to Robert in the 3 spot, fine. Then that's likely Yoan Moncada because he's got a little bit more speed, right? And I also look at, I don't know if you want to put it on the young guy in Dominic Fletcher, who still isn't assured of a job, even though I think that's his job to lose in right field. but the guy does hit for a high average, right? So, I mean, he might be, generally I want a guy that's going to get on base in that 2 spot who doesn't need to have a ton of power. And that's the one thing you've talked about with that guy. Doesn't have a ton of power, but could be on base when the guy with the power gets up there. So I find it to be very interesting. Like we're going to be looking at guys that are going to make the team, but then you're also going to be looking at, okay, well, how's he going to construct his lineup? And I'm wondering whether or not that's running through your head right now, because I look at it as, okay, fine, Benintendi, that's who he feels comfortable with in the 1 spot. I liked when they had to use him up there. He was more effective than any other option that we had last year in that spot. So, okay, fine. And then I look at that 2 spot and I say, is it Moncada? Is it Robert up high because he gets the most amount of bats if he's sitting 2? Or is it a guy like Fletcher who throughout his entire career, high batting average, really good on base percentage, and the only knock on him is that he's a guy who hits doubles more than he's going to hit home runs?
Yeah, and I think that's where it's going to come down to. My problem with the lineup right now as I'm going through it, and like you said, as you're trying to imagine it, Eloy Jimenez hitting 4th versus Andrew Vaughn hitting 4th. I don't know. Who's hot, right? Where do you place Yoan Moncada?
Really? You think that Jimenez is basically equal to Vaughn? I don't see it because I don't see Vaughn having the power numbers.
No, I don't see Vaughn hitting the power numbers, but I think Vaughn, in terms of contact and clogging the bases, I think there's an equivalency there. I think Jimenez will probably hit 4th for the most part, as long as he's on the field, and as long as he's actually hitting, which we've sometimes seen him struggle at the plate too. But and my point is that I don't know that it's going to move the needle one way or the other. For sort of the middle of the order guys, which are Moncada, Vaughn, and Jimenez, where you put them. I think the top of the order guys, Robert 3 versus Robert 2, it does create more of an interesting thought of like, what do you do at the 2 spot if it's Robert in the 3 hole? And Fletcher makes sense. But the problem I have is that you're sort of limited in what you can do because your catchers and your 2 middle infielders are all bad. They're all number 9 hitters. You've got
it's terrible down there. The 7, 8, 9 is terrible down there at the bottom of the order. DeYoung and Lopez and Maldonado or Max Stassi. I mean, like that's bad at the bottom of the order.
Yeah, and Maldonado will not hit. By the way, he never has.
That's why I wonder who your 6 hitter is, because your 6 hitter is going to have no protection. Your 6 hitter has to get behind the 5 hitter and has to at least make a pitcher pitch to the 5 hitter. But the 6 hitter is going to have the worst run. So do you want to make life easier on a guy like Andrew Vaughn or Yoan Moncada, who have been in the majors for a long time and probably should be more capable of batting with less protection behind them? Or do you sacrifice up this young guy that you brought in to play right field if he makes the team and is the starting right fielder, and then say, okay, kid, you're going to bat 6th now with these 3 behind you? I mean, what are his chances for any kind of success in getting used to Major League Baseball? So, I mean, like that I think has to be a question for Pedro as well.
Well, yeah, and I honestly think what you're going to see is you're going to see Paul DeYoung, at least at the start of the year, assuming that he wins the shortstop job, you're going to see him in the middle of the order, higher up than you expect to see him based on what he's done recently, because they're going to try and protect him a little bit and let him sort of recapture what he once was with the Cardinals. Why he keeps getting these chances is his defense, but he used to have some power, right? And that was his thing. So I think they're going to try and protect him up there, and he's going to have the protection of having. If Moncada's not in the 2 hole, then I think he's down there.
Okay.
And then the question is, does Moncada, or if it does happen to be Vaughn, does he get the protection of Dominic Fletcher, or is Fletcher up in the 2 hole? And I think you're going to see a little bit of moving parts there too, because if they're not going to play Fletcher against lefties, if it's going to be more of a strict platoon and you're going to see Pilar in there, or if they're going to, try and move in some other parts, if you're going to see Mike Moustakas play, okay, and get some at-bats against righties, and how they're going to work that in, I think there's going to be some moving parts towards the bottom there. But I think what it's going to come down to is, if Nicky Lopez and Paul DeYoung want to keep a job long-term, they're going to have to be at least league average, which would help the bottom of that order.
And you have to have somebody who's a good middle infielder who can play shortstop on your bench for the inevitable pinch hit late in the game of DeYoung or Lopez. Like, you have to do, and I think it's kind of like everybody keeps saying, well, it's a lost year, right? It's a lost year. You can't win any games. All right, fine. I'm not going to go in thinking that way. Let's see what they can do in this terrible division with a bunch of owners that won't spend money together. Let's actually see. These are things I'm looking at for a manager that I think should have been fired before the season started. Okay. What is your philosophy? How are you going to maximize whatever you're given by the front office and the ownership? What are you going to do with these guys? Because these are real questions. And you wonder, I mean, this is the question that hopefully is asked of Getz at some point. Who's making the lineups? How in lockstep are you guys? And because all of this stuff will matter this year. Even if the season doesn't matter, even if they really are just building for next year, even if it's like, well, we got to see what we have and then we may spend money.
We're aiming for 4th place here.
I want 3rd. Maybe 2nd.
I think second or 3rd place in this division is very, very doable.
This is what I want. I want him out of the gate quick. I want Colson Montgomery joining the team. I want lightning in a bottle, and all of a sudden they're in 1st place in the crappy division. That's what I want. I want that. I want the White Sox. I want Pedro on a microphone in July talking about the doubters and clearly referencing people like us. That's what I want.
Right.
I want every single prediction about this team being bad shoved in our faces. And I want a glib owner who didn't even spend above the league average talking about how he doesn't need to spend because, look, we just won the division. I want that. I'm not going to get it, but I want it.
Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement.
Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found and always on soxinthebasement.com.